The Retirement Café podcast, Why an Early Dementia Diagnosis Matters, with Dr. Ben Hicks. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Retirement Café podcast with me, your host, Justin King. If you're thinking about your retirement or already retired, you're in the right place. My aim is to help you plan for and live a successful and meaningful retirement. Retirement is far more than just a financial event. It's a significant life event, a major transition, which will bring with it new challenges and opportunities. So each episode contains tips, information, and inspiration to help you feel more informed and confident about your retirement. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me for the latest episode of the Retirement Café podcast. Chatting to me today is Dr. Ben Hicks, Research Fellow at Brighton and Sussex Medical School. I first met Ben 5 years ago when he joined me on the panel of one of our first Retirement Café events. Back then, he was working hard to change the perception that dementia is no longer a death sentence in his role as a psychologist and researcher with Bournemouth University Dementia Institute. Ben is still working in the field of dementia as co-ordinator of the Determined research program, which is looking at why care for dementia patients is unequal. In our conversation, Ben explains the importance of an early diagnosis and the impact this can have upon people's health, level of comfort and happiness. He firmly believes that with an early diagnosis and the right research, technology and care, dementia sufferers can live well with the disease for many years. Before I share our conversation, I must apologise for the poorer than usual sound quality. Unfortunately, 30 seconds before I was starting to chat with Ben, my microphone malfunctioned, so I had to jump onto a colleague's computer. I hope that you will still enjoy this episode. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Ben Hicks. Welcome to the Retirement Café podcast, or welcome back, in fact, to the Retirement Café podcast, Dr. Ben Hicks.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. It's nice to be back.
Yeah, well, gosh, it's a little while since we spoke, and a lot has changed. The last time I think was 2018. Well, obviously. A lot of days and years have passed since then, of course, and a lot has gone on in the world. But a lot's changed for you. Tell me what you're up to now.
Yeah, as you say. Thanks, Justin. It's been a pretty hectic, busy few years. I'm that in a kind of minor global pandemic kind of in between as well. So I was last time I spoke to you, I was in Bournemouth University.
Yeah.
And since then, I have moved to Brighton and Sussex Medical School up in Sussex University,
Lovely.
Still within dementia care research,
Right.
but now primarily focusing on that. And I've moved to, well, I'll tell you a bit more about it in a bit, but moved to work on a more national level study, so a much larger project that's looking at the care pathway. So it's all very exciting. I'm very much enjoying it at the moment.
Great. And what was it? You mentioned that you're passionate about dementia and dementia care in the UK. What was it that made you want to make the move?
Well, firstly, my commute went from a 2.5 hour car drive to a 15-minute bike ride. So that was for my own health, I think, and the kind of mental well-being. That was good for me. But I think it was just the opportunity to work on a really large project with our chief investigator is Professor Shubi Banerjee. So within the dementia care field, he is very, very well known. So the opportunity to work with him, to work on a project that spanned the whole of England, where I felt we were really well positioned to make positive changes at a policy level. So I think, without any kind of disrespect to the work that I was doing previously in Bournemouth, it was quite small scale, working at a local level and trying to support care homes, support dementia practitioners, support people living with dementia and their family members to live well at that kind of local level and help with kind of local policies there. But now it was just too good an opportunity to turn down, working on this much larger scale project for the National Institute for Health Research and the Economic Social Research Council, so two really prestigious funders, came together for to put in a lot of money to run this project, and it was just a fantastic opportunity.
Wow, wow. So, I think the project is called Determined, is it? Determined?
Determined. Yeah,
Determined.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And so, what is it? What are its aims? What are you
Yeah.
trying to achieve?
Yeah, so determined, it's a program of work with a number of work streams that feed into it. So the overall aim is to look at that dementia care pathway from the point of diagnosis and to track it over a 3-year period to understand quality of life, I suppose. So who does well and who has good quality of life over that period, and who perhaps struggles, and what challenges do they face, and how can we address them or look to address them. So the overall aim really is to make the care pathway equal for everybody, so everybody has the best possible chance for us living as well and as long as they can with dementia. So what we know at the moment is it's quite a postcode lottery. Depending on where you're diagnosed will depend on whether you've got access to formal care services, social services, Alzheimer's Society. And we know that some people, particularly in the deprived, rural, coastal communities, may really struggle with that. But we know other people, once they're diagnosed, can have access to all of these services, can get access to a diagnosis in a timely manner as well. And so it's trying to even it, trying to make it equal for everybody. That's the aim.
Yeah, yeah. And I can imagine the challenge, from just what you've mentioned about, some people are living in very different environments, and therefore to offer them a similar care in a very rural environment, or comparable to a local community town kind of based approach, it must have significant challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, yeah, exactly as you say. It's very difficult. I mean, there's also positives to living in those rural communities as well, and I think that really came through in some of the kind of COVID work that we're doing. That actually, where there is a lack of formal services for people to access, or lack of Alzheimer's, so those kind of tight knit rural communities can sometimes come together and support the person as well. So it's not necessarily that they're going to have a bad experience with dementia, and actually they can draw on these informal support networks maybe more than the formal care services. So it's a different experience. So it's trying to understand that as well, and also therefore what support that people within those rural communities may need, and how that's different from people in urban communities. I think it's important that we don't have this kind of one size fits all, one approach fits all, kind of one size fits all approach, and we look at the different level of what sorts of support are needed within the different communities.
Yeah.
And on that, you've also got communities who differ by kind of culture and ethnicity, and we're trying to explore that within Determined as well. So what is it that these communities need, and what sorts of support do they need, and what sorts of support does that look like? Perhaps they aren't accessing the formal care services, so we need to understand why that might be, and therefore what support we can do. And that might be raising dementia awareness among the religious leaders or religious groups or cultural groups and things like that, so that they can promote the messages around good dementia quality care, timely diagnosis, and things like that.
Yeah.
It's an ambitious aim, I must say, with Determined, and we are trying to do as much as we can to address a number of these really important research questions that can help policy and practice moving forward.
Sure, sure. And Ben, what in the since I last spoke to you, which was obviously 5 years ago, what developments, what improvements have been made in dementia care in the UK? Have we made real progress?
I think, I mean, we've definitely been trying, but yes, I do. I think there has been. There's certainly, what I've noticed now, there's certainly more recognition of the importance of dementia care. So a lot of the funding used to, well, and it still does, but big money funding went to finding drugs, quite rightly, in a way that we can try and stave off some of the challenges that people face, like the cognitive deterioration. So a lot of the money on that went to drug companies, or looking at biomarkers, so how we can diagnose it earlier through bloods and things like that, in order so maybe perhaps the drugs can be more effective, or we can try and target drugs at an earlier stage for people. And a lot of the money went towards that. But I think there's now a recognition that supporting people to live well with a condition is just as important. And so more money has now been directed towards research that looks at improving that care pathway for people. And we are one of the examples of that. The Economic Social Research Council and National Institute for Health Research coming together and funding multi-million-pound projects, 4 or 5 multi-million-pound projects that are spanning 5 to 6 years, with the specific aim of improving that care pathway for people. And I think that's a real example of that. And the work that we're doing, looking at dementia awareness, certainly shows people have more of an understanding of the condition. There's now more intervention. Certainly colleagues within my institution, Brighton Assisted Medical School, are working with schools to raise awareness among younger children. So we appreciate that there's likely to be more younger carers. We do some excellent work in the medical school, where we have a program called Time for Dementia, where our trainee medics and health professionals spend 2 years visiting people with dementia to understand that lived experience, so that they can take that into their practice when they've qualified as doctors and healthcare professionals. So I think we are doing a lot to raise awareness of dementia, and there's still more we can do. Like the recent Alzheimer's Society report came out showing that still there's a high percentage of people that still believe dementia is a natural part of the aging process, that there's nothing we can do to prevent dementia, prevent us from being diagnosed with dementia. There's still a fear to some extent around the label or the term or the concept of dementia as well. So there's still more work we can do, but there's definitely been big steps, and there's been the money made available to some extent to enable us to make those steps as well.
Yeah, yeah. And what impact did COVID have on people in, obviously being diagnosed, and also has dementia, did COVID have an impact on dementia? Did dementia have an impact on COVID? What's your understanding about the intricacies of that melting pot?
Yeah, so from a care perspective, certainly, yeah, massively. So it might be helpful if I just explain a little bit about determined, and then I can will give context for our findings. So within the project, we're working in Sussex, Surrey, Kent, London, and Newcastle, and across those areas of England, we've recruited 950 people with a diagnosis of dementia. So everybody on our cohort has had a diagnosis, has joined the cohort within 6 months of receiving a diagnosis. So we got people very early on, and actually the mean was about 3 months. So everybody on our cohort was pretty much diagnosed within 3 months. And now, the way the project was set up to run, in the kind of ideal utopia, was that we would recruit 900 people within the first year, and we would visit them. We would deliver a range of measures looking at their quality of life, their well-being, the services that they access, and then we would revisit them once a year for 3 years. And over that way, we'd kind of understand or track their care journey that they go through. What actually happened was that we got about 270 people on our cohort, and then the pandemic hit. So we immediately got shut down. We couldn't go to visit people in their homes. People weren't getting diagnosed because the diagnostic services closed. So we had this preliminary cohort, primary cohort of about 270 people, and around about 250 of those had family members or carers in there. So we're also looking at the carer journey as well, alongside the person with dementia. So we had these people initially, and then we were able to collect some data from them during the pandemic. So we collected some data after the first lockdown, and then again once a year later, over the next few years. So we've now got four data points from the people that we recruited pre-pandemic. We started back up with our recruitment again in 2021, in March 2021, and now we've just finished our recruitment as of this year, January 2023. That's what we're on now, isn't it? Yeah, January 2023. So we've now got this kind of sub cohort that we recruited pre-pandemic, and another cohort that's post-pandemic. So we can start these cohorts, and that's our long-term plan for the project as well, to really understand the impact of the pandemic in terms of quality of life, in terms of diagnosis rates and things like that. But we have done some published research, which I'm happy to forward lay summaries to you if your listeners are interested in accessing some of this work and if they want from you. And it's also available on our website, which I can send you a link to as well. But the work that we've looked at this pandemic, the pre-pandemic cohort, has shown, interestingly actually, that the people with dementia on our cohort tended to maintain their quality of life across this 2 to 3 year period, which was a surprise to us. We thought that the people were going to really face some real challenges that was really going to impact on their quality of life. And we explored this in a more qualitative level. So we went out and we talked to people a bit more. We interviewed them over the phone. And actually what we found was that the people that we got quite enjoyed the break in society at having just received the diagnosis of dementia. So it enabled them perhaps to come to terms with it a little bit more. They didn't have to feel like they had to go out and engage in the kind of hustle and bustle of the world. They could take their time, come into terms with it. And for them, that was quite beneficial. And then as we come out the back of the pandemic, things started opening up a bit more, services started to open up. We see a little increase in their quality of life, actually. So it's sort of maintained steadily, and then the slight increase as well. So that's over a 2 to 3 year period. So that went against our kind of initial expectations and what we thought, but seems to make sense. So it might be different for people who perhaps have been diagnosed a bit later down the line, maybe 1 or 2 years, and the pandemic may really have interrupted and had a kind of detrimental impact on their well-being and quality of life. But what we found for carers was that it was a real challenge, and our carers, in all of the measures that we looked at in terms of quality of life, in terms of loneliness, it deteriorated. There was a massive hit to their quality of life, their well-being over this period. And what we think has probably been going on is that the carers played quite a sacrificial role and have had to step in where these formal care services aren't around, kind of given up their own quality of life, well-being in order to maintain or support the quality of life and the well-being of the person with dementia. And what other studies pre-pandemic that have attempted to track quality of life, and there's not many, there's only about 1 or 2, what they've shown is actually people with dementias, again, is fairly well maintained, but also carers as well over that period. And what we've demonstrated in ours is that actually there was a big hit. And even after services started to open up again and informal, formal networks were open again and people could access them, this didn't have much of an impact on carers' quality of life. There was a little bit in one of our subdomains of quality of life, which talks about feeling supported. So that went up a bit after the pandemic, immediately after the pandemic, but then crashed again post pandemic. But overall, the general quality of life has gone down. So that's a real concern. And that's a real concern for policy and practice, because it really highlights the need to provide services that enable carers to access them for their own well-being, for their own respite and care, but also services that they can access with the person with dementia as well, to support them in that. And there's a real need for that now.
Yeah, sure. And so, off the back of all this research that you're doing, that's such a large cohort. What you're going to get some real evidence of the state of play of the nation, I suppose. What do you hope what do you hope with the end results? What do you hope with the policy changes that you're going to see with the evidence that you can put in front of the policy makers?
Yes, it's a really good question. So we're working with the Alzheimer's Society. They're going to be an important player within all of this. So our plan is to go with them, to be in some part led by them as well. So we have huge data set these are 2 to 3 hour visits that we have with people, and it's amazing that they are willing to give up that amount of time, and they clearly value the benefit of research and understand how they can contribute to it. So it's just such an amazing achievement in one to get this large cohort, but we're so grateful for the people that have given up their time to do this as well. So yes, we've got a massive data set, huge numbers of measures, so we can start to interrogate that in a number of different ways, and we will be guided by the Alzheimer's Society on that, and what the key kind of policy changes that they would like evidence for. So from my perspective, what we know, or what is assumed at the moment, is that an early diagnosis leads to better quality of life outcomes. There isn't any empirical data that tests that, but what we would assume is that is a good thing. People get if the earlier you get diagnosed, or timely diagnosis, so when the diagnosis is right for you, you get a better understanding of the condition, you get better access to you can access drugs which may have some positive influence or positive impact on you. You can access services. So the thinking seems to be that in the long term that will help you. But actually what we know is dementia is a stigmatized condition. Some people can report having got the diagnosis, they lose their driving license. If you're in a rural area, that's really difficult then to get around, to maintain your social inclusion, connection with communities. We know people can start to feel isolated because their friends, their colleagues start to fear it a bit, start to fear them as a consequence, and so they lose touch with those people. So we know that having the diagnosis can also have a detrimental impact. So what we can do now is actually really test that. Does having a timely diagnosis or an early diagnosis impact on your quality of life? So we've got people in from within 6 months of a diagnosis, but we're taking a range of measures on their levels of cognition at that point. So we know, and we've certainly seen in the post-COVID cohorts, that people have quite severe cognitive deficit even at this point, even though they've just been diagnosed. And partly that could be because the diagnostic services haven't been running. So actually they've got their diagnosis maybe a year and a half, 2 years later than what they would have if the diagnostic services hadn't shut down. But what we could do is split our cohort up and say, well, these people still seem to have kind of only mild levels of deterioration. These people have moderate to severe levels. We'll split them up. We can call this mild deterioration early diagnosis, this moderate severe probably a late diagnosis, and then we can track them. And in that way, we can start to provide some sort of evidence that can inform policy on, is it beneficial for people to get an early diagnosis? And if it is beneficial, for which people? For who? Is it more beneficial in urban areas where you can still keep connected, whereas in later areas, in rural areas, perhaps is that quite as important? Maybe you don't need the diagnosis because it's better to have access to your car a bit longer or things like this. So we don't know. So that's something we can test, and that I think will be really help to inform policies around timely or early diagnosis.
Yeah. So I can only imagine that. It feels logical to say an early diagnosis is going to be beneficial for everyone. Okay, except of course the stigmatization, of course, that is going to come from, as you are quite rightly identified a second ago. But for the listeners who think, right, okay, so early diagnosis is a good thing. When you say early, what do you mean early? And then also, how does someone go about getting that early diagnosis? What is available to a listener who's kind of already thinking maybe someone they know, or even made themselves, thinking, well, how do I make sure that I am one of the people who get an early diagnosis?
Yeah, so it's different really what your definition is. So if you're looking at
from a kind of biological change or blood markers and things, early diagnosis will be when it's first detected to get it done. But obviously, usually then you're not showing massive symptoms and that. So what we're talking about here, early diagnosis, is probably when you start to feel something, not quite right. And you think, is this really, so the memory will have slight deterioration as you age, but something that's definitely a significant shift within that. And usually what we're finding is it tends to be other people that pick up on it initially. And it's whether they feel comfortable enough talking to the person saying, look, I've also noticed this within you. How are you feeling about it? And because of the public perception, because of the kind of some of the public perception that leads to this kind of fear of dementia as a death sentence, I think people can be unwilling sometimes to acknowledge it, even if they think something is not quite right here, but then actually seek help for it. And that varies within people. I know that my previous work around older men with dementia, encouraging those older men that retain a kind of stiff upper lip, stoic mentality to maybe kind of seek some help is quite a big ask and quite a challenge. And I know their spouses really found that quite a challenging thing as well. So I think when you start to notice things that might not be quite right, you don't feel quite right in yourself, in terms of like just memory lapses perhaps, but also one of the early signs is you can look at a clock and not quite understand the time and things like that. So that's one of the early things. And if other people start to notice as well, then I would advise seeking some help. I would advise at that point accessing or accessing some of the memory services. But then you've also got to think about so our memory services there's a huge backlog now as well from our memory services that just opened up. So it's very difficult, and they're trying to work to get through the backlog as well. So again, that could delay some of your ability to access that diagnosis as well. So even if you do recognize them early and attempt to go, then again, there could be a bit of a delay there as well.
I think that is all a challenge, and of course, if you think it's happening and then you can't access the service, that's a significant problem, and of course, a greater concern of worry, isn't it? You can imagine someone sitting there, or a loved one sitting there, thinking, "Well, I need to get this sorted," but not being able to access the service is really difficult.
And I think the important message really is that dementia it's not a death sentence. People can live. What we know, or what people the perception of dementia tends to be those kind of late stages, palliative care stages, and that's what sticks with people. Like, people can live a long time and really well with the condition, and if you get it early enough, you can start to put things in place early in order to enable you to do that. You can have openly, if people want to have conversations about at what point you want to give up things or hand over control of things, and how that would be, and how much you're willing to hand over and you can have those conversations early if you get a diagnosis earlier and start to put those provisions in place. So I think it's important for people to understand, as I was saying, it's not a death sentence. And I've interviewed people who've been living with the condition for 12 years, and they're still living well with it. So I think it's really important to emphasize that. And it's worrying, and it definitely is worrying. And I'm not in any way belittling that. It's worrying and it's challenging, but you can also live very well with it. And if you can put things in place early enough, it can really be beneficial for your care pathway.
Great. And then maybe then, just as a real takeaway for people listening in who are worrying, could you just give kind of a brief summary of the services that are available to people? So where if they're suddenly thinking this is going on, what can they do, and where can they get access to your research, access to information to empower them to live well, like you said?
Well, I mean, there's lots and lots available now. So my immediate one is the Alzheimer's Society. They do some fantastic work, both at a policy level and also at a practice level. So they have dementia advisors And lucky enough, in some of the clinics that we work in within the Sussex area, once you have received your diagnosis, your next meeting you have is with an Alzheimer's dementia advisor, and they will talk you through everything. But it's a really, really fantastic resource. Unfortunately, it's not available everywhere again, which is this kind of postcode lottery I was talking about at the start of the podcast, the importance of trying to highlight the benefits of that as well. So I think the Alzheimer's Society is an important resource. If people are more kind of research minded, then there's a number of really excellent studies, ours being one of them, I'd say, but there's other cohort studies that are like the Ideal study down in Exeter that's produced, again, followed people over a number of years, produced documents and research around that, really accessible work that highlights evidence-based practice for supporting people to live well. So definitely tap into all of these resources.
Brilliant. And what do you think next 5-10 years? Where are we going to be? What kind of improvements would you like to see? What's your vision of the dementia care in the UK?
I mean, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, my hope is that it will be an equal care pathway for everybody, regardless of where you live, regardless of your gender, your race, your culture, your sexuality. You will be able to access a care service that does not discriminate, treats you as a person rather than just another patient, understands all the dementia is it's known as a master characteristic. As soon as you say to somebody, you've got dementia, or you've got dementia, that's the only thing people think about. Well, you're probably going to be like this. You're probably based on assumptions of what you know about dementia, what you've read about dementia, what you hear about it. And you forget all these other aspects of a person's life and who they were and that life history. And they continue through while you're living through the condition. But people can just be drawn towards caring for these biomedical challenges of dementia and forgetting all these other aspects. So for me, it's ensuring that people remember that person behind that label, that condition, and support them in a way that is beneficial to that person, in that individual, and not just treat them as just another patient with dementia. And that's me. And that practice and policy can draw on really, really robust evidence to enable them to make these decisions. And as I sort of said at the start, there's now a bit more of a recognition of that, and funding has been made available to create that, or to undertake that robust research. And so it's about starting to draw on that evidence base to inform practice and to inform policy. And that's my hope as well, that this kind of research will continue, will be funded properly, so we can start to answer these really important questions and provide the evidence we need to support practice and policy moving forward.
Yeah, brilliant. Great words. Well, Dr. Ben Hicks, thank you ever so much for spending some time with me this morning. Where can people find out more about the work that you're doing and the research papers that you mentioned before?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a website which is determined. So it's determined without the E at the end. So determined, as you said. I don't know why our chief investigator didn't put the E in there, but I haven't had that chat with him. So it's determined.org.uk. is our website. You can read a lot more about the projects there. You will be able to access any of the research there as lay summaries. There are also links to the paper. So all our work is open access. So it's not behind any paywalls. So you can read, if you're that way inclined and like to read academic papers, then you can access them there and read them there, and they're all freely available. So please do. And there's also an email address there that people can get in touch with us on. So if you want to know more about it, then please do get in touch with us. And we're a very friendly team and more than happy to answer your questions. And we will be putting on, so the project is due to finish at the end of 2024. So towards the end of next year, we'll be putting on a big dissemination event, which probably across England, in a number of places across England, So if you're interested in that, we can also keep you informed, and please come along and listen to our work there as well.
Brilliant. Well, once again, thanks for the great work that you're doing, and for the time that you spent with us this morning.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks again for inviting me back. It's been great. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Justin. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks once again to Dr. Ben Hicks for joining me today. If you know someone who's affected by dementia, I hope our conversation gives you some hope that a lot of positive changes are on their way. If you want to get involved in the study, you can visit the Determined website. So check out the show notes for details on how to get in touch. As ever, if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really does help more people like you find us. And for more interviews and retirement planning videos, you might want to check out my YouTube channel, which is just search YouTube for Justin King MFP, or click on the link in the show notes. If you want to get in touch with me or give me some feedback, or maybe some guest ideas, you can reach me on my email, which is hello@theretirementcafe.co.uk. So until next time, I'm Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.